No one should have to endure the discomfort, embarrassment, and discrimination that often comes with being a plus-size passenger trying to navigate air travel.
Well, Jaelynn Chaney made global headlines this weekend after claiming fat people are entitled to extra seats on planes because they're so fat.
Jaelynn Chaney didn't begin her online journey by demanding sweeping changes to airlines and hotels. In fact, she started with simple fashion and makeup reviews, a young creator trying to carve out her place. But somewhere along the way, she discovered that outrage drew more eyes than eyeshadow ever could. Her petitions and viral clips began to demand not only free plane seats, but stronger hotel beds, reinforced chairs, and even hallways wide enough to accommodate her. Each request sparked fierce debate, fueling her rise while stacking criticism higher than ever. But her story doesn't end with demands. It ends in handcuffs. How did activism twist into arrest? From makeup to activism. When Jaelynn Chaney first introduced herself to the world of YouTube in 2019, her content was surprisingly ordinary. Under the channel name JBay, she wasn't leading with controversial takes or divisive opinions. Instead, her earliest uploads focused on fashion reviews, makeup tutorials, and product testing. What made her stand out in those first few videos wasn't necessarily the content, but the visual of a breathing tube attached to her face. At just 22 years old, this detail was striking. The strange part was that Jaelynn didn't openly identify as someone with a chronic condition. She admitted to facing health issues, but never framed them with the seriousness the audience expected. When she casually mentioned weighing over 500 pounds, it became clear that her physical state was not a side detail. It was the defining factor shaping her life, her choices, and soon enough, her entire online brand. In the early days, her clothing hauls and makeup breakdowns were not exactly catching fire online. The numbers lagged. That is, unless the content veered into more provocative territory such as lingerie try-ons, which generated far more curiosity and clicks. It was around this time that Jaelynn posted fat-shaming storytime in late 2019. For the first time, she opened up about the cruelty she claimed to endure because of her size. She presented herself as someone who had been ridiculed all her life. While the vulnerable approach invited sympathy, it also hinted at a larger theme she would lean on heavily: the idea of being a victim in a society unwilling to accept her body. This line of thinking insists that health is not necessarily tied to weight, that someone can be heavy and still be perfectly fine. For Jaelynn, this argument provided a kind of shield. If smokers or thin people with bad habits could be unhealthy, then why couldn't a person over 500 pounds still claim wellness? To critics, the logic seemed hollow. After all, she openly admitted to medical problems and depended on a breathing tube to function comfortably. Pretending her size had nothing to do with her well-being struck many as dangerous denial. Still, controversy attracts attention, and attention brings opportunity. As Jaelynn shifted her content toward fat activism, her platform began to grow. More people were watching, more people were commenting, and brands noticed. She herself acknowledged that videos embracing this narrative brought her both hate and profit. For her, outrage was part of the formula. As long as the views climbed, she was willing to endure the negativity. The breakthrough came not from long rants or dramatic story times, but from a brief 6-second TikTok. In it, Jaelynn raised the issue of plus-size travel. That short clip exploded with more than 1.7 million views, and suddenly she saw a new direction for her channel. If talking about clothing barely moved the needle and fat-shaming story times had limited reach, talking about airlines and travel hit the jackpot. She doubled down. Soon her content was packed with tips, advice, and complaints about navigating air travel while being plus size. She discussed the way airlines treated passengers of her size, and she documented the difficulties of seating policies. The audience response was explosive, and not in a friendly way. Comments poured in mocking her appearance, shaming her health, and cruelly asking whether she bought extra seats. When one of these travel videos hit nearly 7 million views, the backlash intensified. For many commenters, it was less about learning from her perspective and more about treating her as a spectacle. Some framed the clip as a warning sign for Jaelynn, arguing that this exposure should force her to confront her health. Others were merciless in their ridicule. And yet, from Jaelynn's point of view, this was success. Negative comments didn't erase the fact that the video was circulating in the millions, feeding the algorithm and pushing her name further into public conversation. The cycle continued when she shared another travel-related video, this time centered on how plus-size passengers could survive the ordeal of flying. The phrasing made it sound like boarding an airplane was a test of life or death. That dramatic framing worked. This upload climbed even higher, racking up a staggering 17 million views. And once again, the reaction was scathing. People flooded the comment section with insults and derision, dissecting her appearance and mocking her demands. And soon, those mock demands grew into petitions that ignited even fiercer backlash. Unrealistic demands spark backlash. Riding the momentum, she launched her very first petition, and this became a lightning rod for criticism. At first glance, the idea seemed simple enough. She wanted airlines to establish what she called a customer of size policy. On paper, this would include not only plus-size passengers, but also tall people and disabled travelers who often struggle with cramped seating. That opening demand was reasonable, and it could have sparked meaningful discussion about accessibility in air travel. But the petition didn't stop there. Buried further down the list was a demand that morbidly obese passengers be provided with free seats, sometimes multiple seats, so they wouldn't have to spill into the space of the person next to them. This was the moment her advocacy tipped into controversy. The logic seemed simple to her. Comfort and dignity should be non-negotiable. To others, though, it raised the question of fairness. Why should someone paying for a single ticket be granted a whole row without extra cost when other passengers, often families, paid for every seat they occupied? Critics pointed to examples where this type of policy led to chaotic real-world outcomes. In one highly publicized 2023 incident, a woman and her 2 teenagers were forcibly removed from a flight they had paid for in full. The reason was that an obese passenger had requested an additional seat at no cost, and the airline bumped the family to accommodate her. Stories like these only fueled resentment, and people argued that such policies punished responsible paying customers while rewarding those who had not planned or purchased accordingly. Still, Jaelynn supported these measures wholeheartedly. She frequently cited Southwest Airlines, one of the few carriers with a long-standing customer of size policy. Southwest allows larger passengers to book a second seat in advance and then request reimbursement, ensuring they travel comfortably without forcing other passengers to bear the cost. To her, this was the gold standard, proof that airlines could accommodate plus-size flyers without shame. She argued that other airlines should follow suit, framing it as an issue of compassion and safety. For her supporters, it was an inclusive gesture. For her critics, it was unfair preferential treatment wrapped in activist language. Airlines weren't her only target. Jaelynn widened her focus, setting her sights on hotels. This is where many felt her ideas became detached from reality. In her view, hotels were riddled with fat-phobic design flaws, and she began to suggest sweeping changes. She called for wider, sturdier chairs without armrests in guest rooms and lobbies. Beds, she argued, should come with stronger frames and higher weight limits. Bathrooms needed reinforced seating and larger layouts. Hallways and elevators, she claimed, should be built more spaciously to allow ease of movement for larger individuals and mobility devices. She even insisted on grab bars in every bathroom, adjustable shower heads, and raised toilets as a standard. While her intention may have been to create accessibility, critics immediately pointed out the impracticality. Expanding hallways and elevators isn't a minor adjustment. It's a complete architectural overhaul. Others highlighted how raising toilet seats could actually harm accessibility for disabled guests. Wheelchair users, for example, often need lower seat heights, and Jaelynn's suggestions would make their experience more difficult. The backlash was swift, with many arguing that her demands disregarded the needs of people with genuine mobility impairments while centering only on her personal struggles. Meanwhile, Jaelynn herself had begun relying on a mobility scooter, a gift from a brand partnership. She had grown large enough that walking long distances was no longer feasible, and the image of her zipping around on a scooter while promoting these demands became symbolic for critics. To them, it looked like a cycle of self-inflicted problems paired with unreasonable expectations placed on businesses and other travelers. Public perception was turning. What began as sympathy for a young woman sharing her struggles was transforming into frustration. Her calls for inclusivity felt more and more like extreme entitlement, her tone increasingly defensive, and her policies less rooted in practicality. That image of entitlement set the stage for protests that quickly backfired. Protests, breakdown, and arrest. By mid-2024, Jaelynn Chaney was no longer just posting travel tips and brand promotions. She had begun using her platform to stage what she described as acts of resistance against discrimination. In May of that year, she uploaded a video from SeaTac Airport where she claimed she had been treated in a humiliating way. She had requested wheelchair assistance, but according to her, the employee refused to push her after seeing her size. Instead, they walked away. Jaelynn framed this as outright discrimination, but her critics quickly seized on another interpretation. Pushing over 400 pounds may not have been permitted for safety reasons, and placing the blame entirely on the employee seemed hypocritical. By February 2025, Jaelynn was still speaking on the incident and announced she was organizing a protest in retaliation. She rallied her community with a passionate call to action, asking plus-size supporters to gather at SeaTac Airport to make their voices heard. The video attracted around 140,000 views, and her comment section filled with cheerleaders encouraging her to go through with it. When February 4th arrived, she rolled into the terminal prepared to spark a movement. The turnout, however, was devastatingly small. In fact, it was non-existent. She stood there holding a sign, completely alone in a nearly empty airport. The internet wasted no time in ridiculing the failed protest. People asked bluntly why a staff member should risk back injury pushing her body weight when she herself admitted she could not move without mechanical aid. The logic of expecting others to take on physical strain in the name of inclusivity rang hollow, and the backlash snowballed. While the protest video made the rounds online, it did so as another example of her demands being out of touch with reality. The mounting criticism soon collided with her personal struggles. In late February 2025, Jaelynn posted a bizarre video to Instagram that showed her crying in a car, filming her feet, and retching into a bag. The caption was even stranger. Although it was later edited, it originally suggested she was dealing with a perpetrator who was going to be exposed, claiming she had spoken to the police. She described her situation as involving both abuse and sepsis, and at the bottom of it all, she attached a GoFundMe link asking for financial support. To her followers, the request was baffling. This was the same woman who constantly flaunted free vacations and lucrative brand deals. Why, they wondered, did she suddenly need strangers to fund her healing journey? The skepticism was immediate. One commenter even called her dramatic, and Jaelynn's response escalated into threats of legal action if they did not delete the remark. Another person who liked that comment received a direct message from her filled with personal insults, attacks on their appearance, and even a threat to contact their employer. For someone who had built her platform on demanding respect and empathy, this behavior seemed deeply contradictory. Critics pointed out the irony of a fat activist ridiculing someone's looks while weaponizing her influence against everyday people. To them, this exposed her true motives. Not advocacy, but self-preservation and profit. The cracks in her public persona were widening, and before long, those cracks turned into collapse. On March 3rd, 2025, a Reddit thread dropped a bombshell. Jaelynn had reportedly been arrested, and her charge sheet painted a grim picture. The allegations included misuse of the 911 system, resisting arrest, obstructing law enforcement, and assault with criminal trespass. The most serious of these, the assault charge, was a Class C felony, carrying potential penalties of 3 to 10 years in prison and fines up to $10,000. The news stunned many not only because of the severity but because of the image it painted. An influencer whose body size alone seemed to limit her mobility, now facing accusations of physical resistance and assault. As word spread, people speculated about what the fallout would look like. Would she return to social media begging for bail money? Would body cam footage eventually emerge, showing the dramatic scene in full? At the time of recording, she has remained silent, though her Venmo and Cash App links stay prominently displayed. To many, that silence is confirmation that she is still behind bars, unable to post freely. The entire saga cemented a reputation she had been skirting for years. No longer seen as a bold activist, Jaelynn was increasingly labeled a grifter. Her critics argued that she had discovered a profitable niche in fat activism, realized outrage paid well, and leaned into it with reckless abandon. By doing so, she allowed her worldview to spiral further away from practicality, building a brand on victimhood and confrontation. But the end result was not empowerment or change. It was isolation, ridicule, and now legal jeopardy. What began as a young woman sharing makeup tutorials and clothing hauls had become a cautionary tale of how quickly online personas can unravel when controversy becomes the business model. Jaelynn Chaney's rise and fall illustrates not only the power of social media to amplify voices, but also its unforgiving nature when those voices appear hypocritical or exploitative. In trying to turn outrage into opportunity, she may have created her own downfall. Jaelynn Chaney set out to make the world adapt to her size, but the same demands that brought her fame also led her straight into a jail cell. Was this the fate of an activist who pushed too far, or the natural end of a grift? Let us know your thoughts and don't forget to subscribe.